This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. It's Monday, December 30th. This is Africa 54. Sudanese protesters mark the one-year anniversary of the uprising against the rule of Omar al-Bashir with renewed calls for justice. Two Americans who packed up their lives in the U.S. and moved to Africa share their experiences. And we'll have the latest in sports, including South Sudan wheelchair basketball. We'll have those stories in a moment, but first we begin in Sudan, where a court has sentenced 27 members of the nation's National Intelligence Service to death by hanging on Monday over the killing of a teacher held in detention during protests in February that led to the overthrow of former President Omar al-Bashir. The death of teacher Ahmed al-Khair in the eastern town of Hashim al-Kirba became a rallying point during 16 weeks of protests against Bashir. It is the first time courts have handed down convictions over crackdowns on demonstrations in the months before and after Bashir was toppled in April. 13 other defendants were sentenced to prison and 4 acquitted in the verdict, which could face several stages of appeal. December marks 1 year since protests began in Sudan over rising prices turned into a month-long demonstration that led to the military ouster in April of Omar al-Bashir after 3 decades in power. The coup was followed by a deadly crackdown on protesters before a deal was reached on a transitional government. But as Naba Muhyiddin reports from Khartoum, demonstrators are still demanding justice for those killed.
30-year-old Hisham Shawani was participating in weeks-old mass protest against Sudan's government in January 2018 when security forces shot him 3 times.
My injury was one in the series of repressions and violation that the regime was committing against Sudanese people. My life has changed since. I became more convinced that the situation must change.
After months of widespread protest and sporadic clashes, Sudan's military in April ousted former President Omar al-Bashir from 3 decades in power. But troops in June then used force to clear protesters who refused to leave a month-long sit-in for democracy, leaving at least 87 people dead. A deal signed in August brought a transitional government to power and put Bashir on trial, but many in Sudan condemned the lack of justice for those who died.
The most important thing for us is to achieve justice for the martyrs. Yes, we marched for living and over high prices, but what made us march again and protest is the martyrs' rights, the martyrs who marched with us to build the country. This country isn't owned by someone particularly. It isn't a property for a civilian or a military government. It belongs to the people.
Sudanese this month marked the 1-year anniversary of the uprising, with many calling for justice and the rule of law after decades under Bashir's authoritarian government. Sudan's transitional authorities have vowed to meet those demands.
Justice isn't more related to the former regime. It's related to what happened after the former regime, especially clearing the protesters' sit-in. Justice is also related with restoring rights for people who were killed in war zones and for the displaced, for those fired improperly from their work, for people who were imprisoned and tortured, and also those who were executed without trials.
And older Sudanese remember that past uprising failed to bring about hope for democratic change. For survivors like Shawani, the anniversary is a reminder that the sacrifices to bring lasting change to Sudan should not be in vain. Naba Muhyiddin for VOA News, Khartoum.
Somalia's National Intelligence Security in a Monday tweet is accusing an unnamed foreign country of planning Saturday's horrific bombing in Mogadishu. Somali officials say at least 90 people were killed and many others wounded when a massive car bomb exploded at a busy junction on the southwestern side of the Somali capital. Authorities say the blast occurred at a busy security checkpoint during rush hour at an intersection used by vehicles leaving and entering Mogadishu from Afgoye town. So far, no one has claimed responsibility. but authorities are blaming the Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist group Al-Shabaab.
A truck filled with explosives went off at Ex-Control Afgoye Junction, causing more casualties.
The bombing vehicle targeted a busy taxation office at the junction where vehicles stopped to pay their road taxes. Dozens of wounded people were rushed to hospitals, including children. Saturday's blast was the deadliest in war-torn Somalia in more than 2 years. Now to Guinea-Bissau, where former Army General and Prime Minister Umaro Sissoco Embalo is claiming victory on Monday in the country's presidential election. But official provisional results are not expected until Wednesday. Two former prime ministers are competing to become the next president in a runoff election. Incumbent President Jose Mario Vaz failed to reach the second round of voting, but is vowing to respect the result. The front runner before Sunday's vote was Domingos Simões Pereira, who Vaz fired as prime minister in 2015. Vaz is the first democratically elected president of Guinea-Bissau to complete a full term without being deposed or assassinated since the tumultuous West African country's independence from Portugal in 1974. Ghana has been welcoming descendants of African slaves back to the continent to reconnect with their roots and invest in that country. The country has launched a massive homecoming drive with the hope of attracting at least 1 million African descendants to the West African nation. Africa 54's Heidi Adams Fitzpatrick traveled to Ghana recently and spoke to two Americans who took Ghana up on its offer and moved to Africa.
We often see images of people leaving Africa in search of a better life elsewhere. Well, we're here in Ghana because this country is asking people to come back. It's part of its Year of Return campaign, inviting people of African descent to make this country their home. Well, many people have, and we're here in the capital of Accra to find out how it is going.
We're going to talk about something that,
Bernice Yali was born in America, but desired to connect with her African heritage. So she packed up her life in the U.S.
My parents are Ghanaians. I'd heard about this whole Africa Rising thing, and I wanted to get in on it.
In Ghana's capital, Accra, I catch up with Yali and another returnee, Aretha Owusu, to find out if they think they've made the right move.
So coming to Ghana actually has been a culture shock.
Owusu, born and raised in Ghana, went to law school in the US and lived in New York for 20 years. Now she's back in Accra and runs this wellness store.
I moved back to Ghana only to find out that I'm sort of displaced. I did not realize how much I had changed and how much Ghana had changed in a direction that I hadn't expected.
This West African nation is a comeback story in itself. 3 decades ago, Ghana was on the verge of economic collapse. Today, it is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. The Year of Return is part of its booming tourism industry. But Owusu says doing business here is a challenge, even for skilled professional returnees.
Access to financing is almost impossible. The interest rates are absolutely, outrageous. Accra is a very, very expensive city. We have amazing resources which are untapped into, but there are a lot of challenges that I don't think most people are aware of. I had this sort of rose glasses on, thinking, oh, I'm coming back home, and and then I get home and I'm like, whoa, this is not what I expected.
Yali, who works as an entrepreneur in Accra, worries the diaspora are being sold only the African dream and not the African reality.
And you watch any kind of international news outlet, they're always celebrating entrepreneurs, making it seem as if that's the norm, about their journeys here. It's like a novel. There's always the requisite struggle, and then they persevered, and then they made it. And I think that was the narrative that we were kind of fed.
Migration is always difficult logistically, financially, and emotionally. Yali says a strong support network of family and fellow returnees has helped her adjust to life in Accra. So are you going to stay in Ghana? Is this where you see your future, or are you going to go back?
Everybody has told me it takes about 5 to 10 years to actually see movement when you start a company in Ghana. Abroad, I don't think it's any different. I'm going to hang in. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not going to bail. I'm not going to jump ship and go to places that, it's much easier to live. I've made the choice, yeah.
If I'm Ghanaian American, so I want to have a foot both in Ghana and the United States, so I'll stick around.
Haiti Adams Fitzpatrick, VOA News, Accra.
U.S. President Donald Trump campaigned on the promise of getting the United States out of what he calls never-ending wars. Yet, there are still about 200,000 American soldiers abroad and more troops in the Middle East now than when Trump took office. VOA White House correspondent Patsy Widakuswara looks back at the White House strategy in dealing with foreign conflicts and what may be coming in 2020.
Unrest in northeastern Syria after President Donald Trump's abrupt withdrawal of U.S. forces in October left the region open to Turkey's anti-Kurdish offensive. Weeks later, a Pentagon report showed that the U.S. decision to withdraw has given the Islamic State terror group opportunity to rebuild.
Our position in Syria is more fragile, more complicated now than it was before President Trump made the agreement with President Erdogan.
Trump has relocated troops from Syria to Iraq, where there are now about 6,000 American soldiers. But he is leaving a few hundred behind to protect Syrian oil fields from an IS takeover. The caliphate has lost most of its territory in Iraq and Syria. However, terrorism and violent extremism is still a serious threat.
Is there stability in the region that ensures we will not need to deploy forces or we don't face the risk of future military action? No.
Yet the president often boasts he has succeeded in fighting IS and killing its leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, including during his unannounced November visit to see troops in Afghanistan. 2,000 troops have been withdrawn from Afghanistan, with 12,000 remaining. Peace talks with the Taliban are ongoing.
And we're going to stay until such time as we have a deal or we have total victory. And they want to make a deal very badly.
Trump campaigned on taking a harder line against Tehran and has been ratcheting up sanctions after scrapping the nuclear agreement. The president sent 3,000 troops to Saudi Arabia after a September attack on oil facilities that Riyadh blames on Iran. Months earlier, he vetoed bipartisan efforts in Congress to end Washington's support of Saudi's war in Yemen. Critics say the moves collectively do not add up to a clear foreign policy.
We don't have a clear strategy for ending that conflict. So basically speaking, as you look at this region, those problems are quite severe, and we've compounded them by essentially taking a new stand on the West Bank and the Palestinian issue without coordinating it with our allies and without necessarily having brought any clear plan for peace.
Meanwhile, the U.S. has 28,000 troops in South Korea to deter its neighbor. Trump's talks with Kim have failed to halt Pyongyang's missile tests, with officials promising a Christmas gift at the end of the year.
Kim Jong-un is trying to get Trump's attention because he realizes the U.S. bureaucracy is much more wary of any kind of a compromise deal or negotiations than Trump himself.
Roughly 200,000 American troops are deployed all over the world out of 1.3 million total armed service members. Patsy Widakuswara, VOA News at the White House.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, we'll take you to South Sudan, where the popularity of wheelchair basketball is rising. You're watching Africa 54. We'll be back in a flash.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. The family of Pablo Escobar, the deceased former Colombian drug kingpin and leader of the feared Medellin cartel, is going high-tech and releasing an advanced smartphone with a foldable screen. Escobar Inc. is hoping to use the worldwide fame of the family's name to sell the Escobar Fold 1, which they say will hit the market in January 2020. The Escobar Fold 1 will operate on Android and cost $349. Another version with higher gigabytes and RAM will also be released for $499. Escobar Inc. founder Roberto Escobar Gaviria is Pablo Escobar's biological brother. He turned himself in to authorities in 1992 and spent 12 years in prison for being a member of the Medellin cartel. Next up, smart trains with multiple special designs are ready to go into service on the Beijing-Zhangjiakou high-speed railway Monday. The line is a major project for the 2022 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games. It adopts two kinds of smart trains, the standard version and the Olympic version. The smart high-speed train is installed with several thousand sensors, which automatically examine the system all the time during the operation. The power supply system on the train also uses wheeled robot inspection, which breaks the limitation of previous manual work.
3, out, go, there.
And finally, wearable technology has been named the top fitness trend for 2020. The American College of Sports Medicine has released the results of its annual fitness trend forecast in its Health and Fitness Journal. Wearable tech includes fitness trackers, smart health watches, heart rate monitors, and GPS tracking devices. They monitor fitness and exercise, heart levels, and calorie consumption, while doubling up as phones, texting devices, and maps, plus more. And that's what's trending today.
U.S. Representative John Lewis, the youngest and the last survivor of the Big Six civil rights activists, once led by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., has been diagnosed with advanced pancreatic cancer. A veteran Democratic congressman from the southern state of Georgia, Lewis, 79, has fought many struggles in his lifetime, but he says, quote, "I have never faced a fight quite like the one I have now." Lewis announced on Sunday that the cancer was detected in early December. As a civil rights activist at 25, Lewis was beaten so badly his skull was fractured, and the television images from an Alabama bridge in the 1960s forced a nation's awakening to racial discrimination. He was arrested at least 40 times in the civil rights era and several more times as a congressman since being elected in 1986. Recently, he has been rallying to help reunite immigrant families separated by the Trump administration. The White House says it would consider other tools beyond diplomacy if North Korea reignites tensions over its nuclear program by going ahead with a threatened Christmas gift. Pyongyang has imposed an end-of-year deadline for the United States to soften its stance on nuclear talks that have been stalled since February. Here's VOA's Arash Arabasadi.
North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un recently promised a Christmas surprise to the United States. Experts believe the vague threat shows Kim's frustration in stalled talks on its nuclear program. President Donald Trump this week on Christmas Eve joked at what the surprise could be.
Let's see, maybe it's a nice present. Maybe it's a present where he sends me a beautiful vase as opposed to a missile test, right? I may get a vase. I may get a nice present from him. You don't know. You never know.
Experts suggest not-so-beautiful gifts ranging from long-range missile or underground nuclear tests to even a satellite launch into space. Sunday, National Security Advisor Ambassador Robert O'Brien lauded the president's personal diplomacy with Kim.
Kim Jong-un promised to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. We want to hold him to that commitment. If he doesn't, we have other tools in the toolkit as the United States, and we'll use those as necessary.
But O'Brien's predecessor, John Bolton, is among those saying there is no chance the North denuclearizes. No doubt a strain to the on-again, off-again diplomatic love affair between Trump and Kim. O'Brien says the president gave Pyongyang options throughout his administration's talks with the North.
He's got two paths in front of him. He's got a glorious path for the people of North Korea, where they could become like South Korea and be a very prosperous, very wealthy country. Or there's another path that takes them down the road of sanctions and isolation and being a pariah state.
North Korea has conducted 13 rounds of short-range ballistic missile and rocket artillery tests in 2019. Trump has downplayed those tests as unimportant. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News, Washington.
It's time for Monday Sports Report, and joining us now is Africa 54 sports guru Sunday Shomari. Hello, Sunday.
Hello, Esther. And thanks, Esther. Defending tennis champion Novak Djokovic has landed in Brisbane to prepare for the ATP Cup in Australia as he looks forward to a successful tournament. The season open tournament starts on January 3rd. Djokovic also commented on a viral video posted on Friday that showed his friend and superstar footballer Cristiano Ronaldo giving him some training tips. The inaugural 2020 ATP Cup, a men's team tennis tournament, will be held at venues in Brisbane, Perth and Sydney. Djokovic's Australia arrival comes just 24 hours after Andy Murray pulled out due to a pelvic injury. And Cristiano Ronaldo won Best Player of the Year at 2019 Globe Soccer Awards Thursday at a ceremony in Dubai. This is the third year in a row that Ronaldo has captured the award. He was also awarded the Fans Award. Ronaldo, who came third in the 2019 Ballon d'Or rankings behind Liverpool's Virgil van Dijk and winner Lionel Messi, has now won the award 6 times out of its 9 years of existence. The Juventus star beat out Atletico Madrid's Antoine Griezmann and Paris Saint-Germain's Kylian Mbappe for the honor. And in America's National Football League, finally, after 256 games over 4 months, we now know who will compete for the Super Bowl 54 trophy. The San Francisco 49ers' exciting 26-21 victory Sunday night over the Seattle Seahawks finalized the NFC bracket and set in motion the next 5 weeks of NFL playoffs. And the New England Patriots missed the crucial opportunity to have a bye week after they fell 27-24 to the Miami Dolphins in the regular season finale on Sunday. That loss forces them to play on Wild Card Weekend for the first time since 2009. And now to South Sudan, where wheelchair basketball is growing in popularity and offering hope for athletes with disabilities, some of whom lost legs from unexploded ordnance left from decades of conflict. U.S. professionals, wheelchair basketball players, including Sudanese-American Malat Way, this month helped 80 South Sudanese players participate in a week-long training program and tournament. Shayla Pani reports from Juba.
Malatwe lost the use of his legs to polio in South Sudan when he was 3 years old. When he was 12, after several years in a refugee camp, where his family moved to the United States.
where he eventually played wheelchair basketball at the University of Arizona. In December, he was back in South Sudan as a role model for other disabled athletes.
I went through the same time, the same situation that these athletes are going through. So, as a me coming back, it's a hope for them, saying that there's someone that actually care about us.
Wei helped train 80 South Sudanese wheelchair basketball players for a 2-day competition in Juba. The training is in its third year and was organized by the International Committee of the Red Cross and the South Sudan Wheelchair Basketball Association. Wei says the number of players has more than doubled, and this year, 15 women were included for the first time.
For me as a person in a wheelchair, basketball has really made me feel that we can do something just like able-bodied people.
Conflict and poverty in South Sudan have marginalized more than 1.2 million people with disabilities, including some who lost legs from unexploded ordnance left from decades of conflict. Disability and Inclusion Advisor for the ICRC, Jesse Mark, has trained wheelchair teams in Afghanistan, the Middle East, and South America. The aim is to revise negative perceptions of the disabled, he says.
Once they start to have that confidence in themselves and they start to realize that maybe what they've always been told about what their place in society should be is not what their place in society should be. They should expect more from themselves and from the society around them.
Wei says the training also brings together athletes from different, sometimes warring tribes to train and play as one country. Sheila Poni for VOA News, Juba.
Thanks, Sheila. Great story from South Sudan. And that wraps our sports for today. Back to you, Esther.
Sandy, see you again in 2020.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Sandy. Be sure to watch Sandy Shomari next Monday for another exciting sports report right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a good evening.